Well, hello and welcome to the Denver Homes Market Report. Before I go too far today, I just have to give a quick shout out to my brother, Donnie Schoonover. This man has endured more than I could ever even imagine. And I'm just happy for him, his wife Esmeralda, and their children. I love you, brother. And this show is dedicated to you, Don. Today we embark onto our second season. Last week marks 52 shows on the books. Last week was a monster show. This is Ricky.schoonover of Mode Denver Real Estate. You know how sometimes I get started talking on a subject and it just sort of morphs into an entire podcast. Last week, I really sat out to do our monthly comparisons, where we look at all the sales in a particular month for this year. And then I go back in my MLS time machine and we see how many deals we closed for the same month last year, which kind of helps us determine which year was stronger. Well, before I got into the numbers, another issue had come up that same week. I got off on a bit of a tangent as I was explaining a situation where I had met a potential seller and they were leaning towards doing some sort of for sale by owner or some sort of hybrid of a for sale by owner. And I took the time to explain how the multiple listing service is where over 90% of homes are sold. And their compare to a FSBO price with full market value was just no comparison. There is just no substitute to reach as many potential buyers any other way. There is a reason the MLS, or multiple listing service system, has helped bring more sellers and more buyers together than any other scheme out there. A system where buyers and sellers are both protected with full fiduciary duty. Realtors follow a code of ethics and they vow fair and honest dealings. This builds confidence within the entire industry and with each and every transaction. Then, of course, buyers receive their fair representation, usually for free. They get to choose their realtor or their real estate professional, and in the overwhelming number of transactions, that service is free to them. So why would a buyer even attempt to go it alone? It just makes zero sense. Here in Denver, the seller almost always pays for the buyer's representation. Now, this number is negotiable, but you'll often see 2.8% coming from the commissions of the listing broker and being shared with the broker who brings the buyer to the table. As a FSBO, you do not sell your home for free. There are attorney's fees, marketing, for sale signs, professional photography, virtual tours, staging, title companies, etc. All of which a realtor can help set you up with, often get you discounts, or even include some of these in their services. For instance, I typically mail out over 2,000 mailers in the course of a listing. That's well over $2,000 right there, just in printing and mailing. Then I also cover the photography. And in today's COVID world, a high-end virtual tour is no longer an option. It's downright essential. Also, if the property I'm selling could benefit from maybe a drone flight and aerial shots, I cover that as well. When it's all said and done, the FSBO seller often ends up with less money in their pocket than if they would have hired a trusted realtor right out of the gate. I finally wrapped up that conversation, and yes, we did squeeze in our Battle of Marches, where March 2021 ended up being a stronger month over March 2020 by about 277 deals. That's right. Even with our tight inventory, we ended up putting more deals together this year in March of 2021 over last year, where around this time we were really just getting hit hard with the pandemic and the lockdowns. So with our 1-year anniversary just coming to pass and 2021 well underway, it's time we get started on the next season of the Denver Homes Market Report. I had a great opportunity come along for this week's show. I was explaining appraisal gaps to my clients just yesterday. As we were strategizing our offer on a particular home, we had been out all day Saturday and looked at 8 homes. And out of those 8 homes, my clients really loved 3 of them. They could see themselves living in any one of the 3. They were all in different neighborhoods, but each had redeeming qualities that made each of the 3 candidates stand out as winners. So Saturday, I was waking up for what I thought was to write an offer on one that they had ultimately decided on. However, there was one other home that had just hit the market the day prior, and we hadn't seen it yet. My clients really wanted to see this home as it was, in their preferred neighborhood and had not been updated. So the price was a little less competitive and would allow them to fix the home up and sort of update it to their own tastes. So we arrived and did our walkthrough, and yes, this seemed to be the winner, even over the 8 homes we had saw the day prior. And there was nobody in the house. So we sat down and I attempted to explain appraisal gaps. In my podcast just recently, we dedicated a show to explain market value versus appraised value. So if you have not heard that show yet, please check it out. So today, I want to go over appraisal gaps and how they can be used to benefit all parties involved. When you buy a home, any home here in the Denver metro area, or anywhere in Colorado for that matter, we have built into our contracts a section on appraisals. It's actually section 6 of our contracts, and they are dedicated to appraisals. So let's say this seller lists their home for $500,000, and you put your offer in at $500,000, exactly what the seller is asking for. Then your lender orders your appraisal. In about 2 or 3 weeks into the contract, the appraisal report comes back, and let's say it comes back at only $480,000. In this case, since you only offered what the seller was asking for, and the appraisal came in $20,000 less, if no other provisions were put into the offer around appraisals, the burden really sits on the seller's shoulders. They were asking $500,000. You offered $500,000. And now the appraisal comes back at $480,000. The seller really bears the burden. of lowering their price to $480. Now, they don't have to. They could let you walk away. They could say, no, they refuse to lower their price to the $480. But in this case, if the seller were try to sell the property to another buyer, legally and ethically, they would be required to disclose to future buyers that there was a recent appraisal done which came in at $480,000. So, if they still refuse to lower their price to $480,000, you as the buyer at that point could walk away. And as long as you are within your time frames, you could get back your deposit. However, you are invested at this point, both emotionally and monetarily. I mean, you are 3 weeks into the contract at this point. You have paid for at least a basic home inspection, probably a sewer line scope, and a radon test. You have already invested $600 or $700 into this home, maybe even more. You really would rather negotiate with the seller than walk away. So here's the situation. The agreed upon price is $500,000. The appraisal is at $480,000. How will we handle that $20,000 appraisal gap? Well, maybe the seller is willing to lower the price to, let's say, $490. But that also still leaves a $10,000 gap where, they may ask the buyer to pay $10,000 above the appraised value. So they lower the price by $10,000. And the buyer brings in $10,000 above their planned down payment. And they continue to close. Now, that's a happy ending, but they don't always end up that way in the middle of a purchase agreement. There is another way to put the appraisal gap contingency into your offer right up front. This way, if the appraisal does come back lower than the agreed upon price, there is already a provision in place on how this will be handled. You would typically only do this if you are offering over and above what the seller is listing the property for. But let's say this same house, you are looking at, it's listed at $500,000, but there are other offers on the table. And you also know some of them are higher than the asking price. But you know what? Of course, you are not sure how high, but you really do not want to miss this house. So you offer $550,000. I mean, come on. That's $50,000 over the asking price. And I sure wish I could say that is unheard of or even rare. But in the past 6 months, this has actually been quite common. So, you also want to include an appraisal gap in your offer before the seller even accepts it. Just in case the home does not appraise for $550,000. How much are you willing to add over and above the appraised value? Now remember, you are not paying more than the house is worth. The worth of the house is determined by market value. Market value is the price the pool of current buyers is willing to pay. It's not appraised value. So, as the buyer, at this moment, you are writing the offer. You are in the driver's seat. You get to decide how much above asking you are willing to, quote unquote, gap, just in case the appraiser does not come into your number of $550,000. Now, I typically guide my clients by saying whatever the value of your offer over and above the list price, you might want to consider to cover at least 50% of that gap. So in this case, the listing price is $500,000. You offer $550,000. And I mean, if the appraisal comes in lower than $550,000, then you should perhaps consider putting in a gap of 50%. So with a $50,000 gap, we should probably agree to cover 50% or $25,000 in appraisal gap. What this means is if you were putting down 20% on a $500,000 home, that would be $100,000. At $550,000, you would be willing to put down your $100,000 plus make up the difference in your loan amount, which would be your $100,000 plus half, or $25,000, as the appraisal gap. Now, the reason this benefits both the buyer and the seller is that you have already agreed on how to handle the appraisal if indeed it does come in lower than your agreed upon price. You don't go into a tailspin and your transaction doesn't all of a sudden go sideways. You have a solid contingency plan in place right there in your contract, so everyone involved knows how things will be handled right up front. Remember, in this market, full market value is the price the pool of buyers is willing to pay. The appraised value is the value a professional tasked with looking after the best interests of your lender and based off historical data has come up with. In a hot market like we are in, sometimes that appraised value and the data they use can be up to 2 months old by the time you get to the closing table. You may already made a profit on your purchase before you get to the closing table. The market is moving that fast. You may be saying to yourself, wait a minute. You just said if my appraisal came back lower than our agreed upon price, but I may have already made a profit on my home purchase. Yes, that is exactly what I just said. You see, as I was pointing out in my previous podcasts, appraisers can only use the prices of properties that have actually closed. They cannot use the list price of homes currently for sale. They cannot use homes that are currently under contract that have not actually closed yet. So the homes they are looking at sometimes closed months ago. Those prices and that data they are using to determine the appraised value of your home in a market moving this fast could be basically obsolete. This is especially true when you have a pool of buyers willing to pay up to 50, maybe even more, above asking price. So I have a good way to present this. Let's say you put your house on the market May 1st and you list it at $500,000. You get multiple offers that opening weekend, and the offer you ultimately choose is for $550,000. And this buyer is solid, but they need a 45-day contract. They wanted to close June 18th because they're going to be out of the country for almost the entire month, and they don't want to deal with trying to close while they're traveling. Appraisers cannot use your list price at $500,000 to help determine the value of other homes in your area. Additionally, they would have no way of knowing your offer was actually $50,000 over asking. So they are not able to use your deal as a quote-unquote comp until after you close, which would be towards the end of June. So now you see how market value, which is the price a buyer is willing to pay, and appraised value, the value an appraiser comes up with, and with how sometimes those can be out of alignment. All right, we are going to wrap up today's podcast. If you have not subscribed to my weekly show, or maybe you're a new listener, my name is Ricky.schoonover. I have been buying and selling real estate for over 18 years. The company I have my license with is Mode Denver Real Estate. You can also check out my website, denverhomesmarket.com. And each week, you can easily hear my podcast. All you need to do is ask your smart speaker, please play my podcast, the Denver Homes Market Report. If you are thinking of buying or selling your Denver area home, please give me a call, 720-688-5110. I'd love to hear from you and what you have going on, and how I may be able to help you reach your goals when it comes to buying or selling your home. We publish our podcast every week on Thursday before 5 p.m. I thank you for listening. I know today went a little bit long, but it's a very important message. So please, tune in next week. I'll see you then.